Some crossovers just feel like they're destined to happen, right? And within crossovers, nothing gets people more feral than the versus battle. One of the oldest traditions in nerd culture is pitting two fictional characters against each other and arguing about who would win for hours, days, or entire friendships. We've all done it, and eventually creators themselves got in on the fun. And while that sometimes leads to painfully obvious favoritism and bad writing, when it does work, it gives us some memorable mashups. Marvel vs. Capcom, Alien vs. Predator, and today's subject, King Kong vs. Godzilla, possibly the most obvious crossover in movie history. But how did this even happen? These characters aren't from the same director, the same studio, or even the same hemisphere, so how are they sharing the same screen? Well, the story starts with Willis O'Brien, the effects artist behind the original King Kong. He pitched an idea where Kong would fight Frankenstein's monster. Yes, really. Now, to be fair, Universal movies like Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman helped popularize movie crossovers in the first place, so it's not like the idea came out of the blue. No, the real problem here was money. O'Brien shopped his idea around, but nobody would finance it. Eventually, Toho stepped in, swapped Frank out for Goji, and accidentally created one of the most famous monster matchups of all time. Honestly, huge upgrade. Kong vs. Godzilla just sounds right. America versus Japan, East versus West, two pop culture titans beating the hell out of each other for the title King of the Monsters. Incredible premise. It's just a shame about that budget. You see, one of the reasons studios didn't want to fund the original Frankenstein project is that O'Brien wanted to use stop motion, which was pretty expensive, and Toho wasn't exactly swimming in cash either. So instead of animation, both monsters are played by actors in suits. Godzilla actually looks pretty cool. Kong, on the other hand, looks like he lost a fight with a carpet store. There is technically some stop motion in the movie, about 3 frames of it, including a shot where Godzilla lands a dropkick on Kong. In concept, it's awesome, but in the movie itself, it's less awesome. Here's the thing. If you can't put up with some primitive special effects, you're gonna have a hard time enjoying old monster movies. That's just a fact. Personally, I find the combination of models, suitmation, and puppetry to be endlessly charming, and I would take that any day over lazy CGI. But sometimes, this movie does cross the line between inventive and just plain cheap. Anyway, that's enough production history. What's the movie actually about? Well, nowadays, King Kong and Godzilla are roughly equal in popularity, but back in the early 60s, Kong was the bigger star. His name comes first in the title, and he's basically the hero of the movie. That tracks. Godzilla was still seen as a walking nuclear disaster, while Kong had mostly been portrayed as just a confused animal who wanted to be left alone. In wrestling terms, Godzilla's the heel, and Kong is the babyface. The movie follows 2 parallel plots that are clearly destined to collide. First, there's this TV executive who wants higher ratings and decides the best way to get them is by exploiting a giant monster. Now, this is an obviously terrible idea, but I would just like to mention that has never stopped the corporation from doing anything ever. See also, Netflix deciding Henry Cavill wasn't that important to The Witcher. Meanwhile, Godzilla is accidentally freed when a submarine destroys the iceberg he was trapped in since Godzilla raids again. Nice continuity touch, I appreciate that. Naturally, Godzilla immediately starts destroying everything in sight, because that's his job. With both monsters headed towards Japan, the movie basically says, alright, let's stop pretending this won't end in violence. Kong fights a giant octopus, Godzilla fights the military, and when they finally meet, they start throwing hands almost immediately. Why? I don't know. Maybe Godzilla said the Peter Jackson remake sucks. The point is, they fight. And to the movie's credit, the fights are actually a big step up from Godzilla raids again. Goji lights Kong on fire with his atomic breath. Kong has the Killer Croc strategy.
I threw a rock at him!
Which works about as well as you'd expect, and the ape retreats after witnessing Godzilla's victory dance. He's still working on it, give him time. Round 1 goes to Goji.
It was was a big rock.
Feeling dejected, Kong decides to cheer himself up by engaging in his favorite hobby, kidnapping a woman and climbing a building. You know, just for old time's sake. The military knocks Kong out with a special gas, and Godzilla celebrates his victory the only way he knows how, by destroying even more stuff. At this point, the humans finally acknowledge the title of the movie and decide, you know what, just fight already. Their solution is to transport the skyscraper-sized King Kong to Godzilla using balloons. Yes, balloons. No follow-up questions. The final battle kicks off. Godzilla initially kicks Kong's ass all over again, but that changes when the big ape gets struck by lightning, which gives him electrical powers. Obviously. Maybe it's a leftover idea from the original Frankenstein pitch? Who knows? Anyway, at this point, the two are evenly matched, and Kong even gets some cool scenes, like picking Goji up by his tail and spinning him around. In the end, Kong wins the fight, swims away triumphantly, and the humans celebrate, convinced that they'll never see Godzilla again. This week. There was a long-standing rumor that the movie had two different endings, one for Japan and one for America, each with a different winner, but that's not true. Kong always wins. The American version just added some scenes of two guys in a room explaining what we already saw. Yeah, sounds riveting. Back in the director's chair is Ishiro Honda, who also directed the original Godzilla. Honda later said that he intended this movie to be a commentary on sensationalism, how TV stations and media outlets would use any dirty tactic imaginable to boost ratings. Which is funny to me because he said that all the way back in the 60s, so I can only imagine what he'd think of today's media landscape. More importantly, King Kong vs. Godzilla marks a major turning point for the franchise. Earlier movies leaned heavily into serious, somber storytelling, but this one showed Toho that Godzilla could appeal to younger audiences. He was redesigned to look less scary, the fights became more exaggerated, and the tone shifted closer to comic books or professional wrestling than tragic drama. On top of that, you got full-on slapstick comedy with the two guys assigned to capture Kong. And when I say slapstick, I mean straight up Looney Tunes stuff. The CEO in particular overacts like his life depends on it and looks like he's wearing Groucho Marx glasses. This lighter tone would define much of the Showa era with mixed results. So how does King Kong vs. Godzilla itself hold up? Honestly, despite the star power of our two leads, it's just okay. The fights are fun, the historical importance is undeniable, but the humor doesn't always land, and the limitations are impossible to ignore. That said, is it worth watching? Sure, especially if you're a kaiju fan. I would just say, keep your expectations in check. In fact, I would argue the next few Godzilla movies are much stronger, and we'll talk about the sequel, Godzilla vs. Mothra, when this channel hits 500 subscribers. So if you've enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss that. Because next up, we're kicking off a short marathon covering a severely underrated genre, stealth games. Up next, Tom Clancy's Splinter Cell. See you there.